Hey everybody, it's Retro DM Ray. I'm back with you for another video on the channel concerning a White Box fantastic medieval game. Last time we read through the races section, and I talked a little bit about that, a little bit about things that I liked and didn't like from that, and things that we did back in the day. So this time we are going to move right on to page 25 in chapter 4 concerning equipment. I'm not going to cover the entirety of every single thing written on the pages here and in the tables, but we are going to read through equipment and progress on into the playing the game section and do a little bit of conversation about that. So, as always, if you like this content, please give me a thumbs up. Please subscribe. Please share with your friends and family. Again, this is always G-rated, so there's not going to be any of that other nonsense on here. We're just going to talk about good old school gaming. Click that bell icon so you get notified when we upload new videos. Check out the description in this particular video and all of my other videos about how to buy me a coffee, support me on PayPal, join my Patreon, become a part of the game that's ongoing now, which is the play-by-email game, a Thunder Rift West Marcher style hex crawl. Be welcome to join that and be a part of that with us. It's really, really cool. We're having a good time so far. And so I just hope you want to sit back, take out your copy of White Box Fantastic Medieval Adventure Game, and let's read through it together today. All right, so we're in Chapter 4, starting on page 25. So it says, each character begins a game with 3d6 times 10 gold pieces, which is used to buy equipment. 1 gold piece is worth 10 silver pieces or 100 copper pieces. Prices for equipment are listed on the tables below in the amount of gold pieces. The referee is encouraged to include additional items and equipment. And I would encourage you to please do that also. Like I said, I use White Box by James Spawn. I also use that's a supplement. I also use the actual Swords and Wizardry White Box. I use Basic Fantasy RPG. You have all kinds of places where you can pull equipment from. Just remember, when you're crossing those equipment lists, you're changing up how weapons and armor function depending on what lists you're using, so adjust accordingly. Equipment weight. A normal quote-unquote level of miscellaneous equipment is assumed to weigh 10 pounds. If treasure is added to this, each coin and gem is assumed to weigh 0.1 pound. All right, so this is a little bit different way to do encumbrance. Maybe it's certainly an easier way to do that. However you choose to do that is up to you. Basic Fantasy has a weight for all of their items and does encumbrance accordingly. First edition Advanced Dungeons & Dragons did it a coin weight way, so there's a bunch of different ways you can do that. Weapon damage, optional. In the original game, all weapons did 1d6 damage regardless of type. White Box provides some slight variation. To play the original game as it was written, simply ignore all variations in weapon damage. They all inflict 1d6 damage, regardless of whether the weapon is a two-handed sword or a dagger. So then you see on page 26 your list of adventuring gear, and it gives you the cost in gold pieces, capacity if it holds items. And it wraps all the way down to table 9, and then table 10 is transportation, where it gives you the costs for that. On page 27, it says important. Numbers for the ascending armor class system always appear in brackets, and then it gives you an example of those brackets. Calculating armor class. To calculate a character's armor class, you must decide which system to use. The two systems have the same armor protection, but in one of them a high armor class is better, and in the other a lower armor class is better. Just decide which you prefer. So in the ascending armor class system, in this system, an unarmored human has an AC of 9. Now, the original game, it was AC 10. Basic Fantasy is AC 10, I believe, possibly even AC 11. I don't have the book right in front of me right now. You can put it in the comments to let me know what it says. But anyway, it says the armor you buy lowers your AC, and the lower the AC, the harder you are to hit in the descending AC system. To calculate your armor class, look at the armor table above in the quote-unquote effect on column. For whatever type of armor you bought, subtract the number shown from your base AC of 9, and that's your new armor class. System number 2 is the ascending AC system. For the ascending system, an unarmored person has an ascending armor class of 10. Ascending armor class is put in brackets as AAC as a reminder of which system is in use. Your armor adds to your AAC. So the higher your AAC, the harder it is for your enemies to hit you. To calculate your ascending armor class, look at the table above armor in the effect on, quote-unquote, column. For whatever type of armor you bought, add the number shown in the brackets to your base AAC of 10, and that's your new armor class. Converting armor class systems. To translate between the ascending and descending AC systems, the ascending armor class AAC and the descending armor class, just noted as AC, values should add up to 19. So, for example, if you have an AC 7, that's the same as an ascending armor class of 12. Why? Because 12 plus that 7 equals 19, and everything needs to add to 19. All right, hiring assistants. Many characters, particularly when first starting on an adventuring career, are in need of hirelings to assist in carrying loot or fighting monsters. Characters are free to create advertisements and inquire at local taverns or inns to find available hirelings. Prices are in gold pieces and are for 1 week of service. These rates are for humans only. Demi-humans cost more to hire, and it may take more than just the promise of gold coins. All right, a minute about that. If you've ever played the old Temple of Elemental Evil, just as an example of an old school retro module, I can tell you, if you don't have either a lot of players, or B, quite a few players with a lot of backup characters, and you don't then have hirelings, you're probably going to be in pretty big trouble in that long module. It's really, really super cool, but hirelings are a really big deal in there. So I would encourage you to take a look into that, see if that's something that you can add to your game to make it more, I guess you would say, survivable and extend your fun for old school modules like that. In Search of the Unknown is another module where you might need that, and certainly if you're going to play through and survive Tomb of Horrors, you better have a small army of hirelings with you. All right, we go to page 28, and this gives you the list of weapons. And I'll give you an example here. You have a two-handed sword. It is a two-handed weapon, and it is listed as damage 1d6 plus 1, has a weight of 15 and a cost of 15 gold pieces. Now, I will just tell you, I've seen a couple of different ways how weapons are differentiated in different ways or styles of running and playing White Box FMAG, and one of them is this. There's a rule, an alternative that's been thrown around that basically if you're fighting two-handed, for example, instead of a sword and shield, you would, and thus get the shield bonus in that offhand, and then your weapon damage in the other. So like longsword would be a d6, and you'd have your shield bonus for AC. If you had two weapons, for example, then you would have a +1 to hit with that weapon, because you're using each one in each hand. I mean, it wouldn't give you an extra attack. The extra attack would come if you were a fighter and you were hitting those one-hit dice creatures. Another way to do that would be to incorporate the two-handed weapon fighting rules from First Edition DMG, First Edition Player's Handbook, maybe even Unearthed Arcana, however you might want to do that. Another way that you would work with weapons might be, for example, if you wanted to differentiate them, a two-handed sword does a d6 plus 1. You could say that fighting with any other weapon that is capable of having two hands on it, so a longsword and putting a second hand on it, would give you that +1 like the two-handed sword does on the d6 plus 1. Now, in First Edition AD&D, as you would notice if you looked on those charts, and as you would certainly see in Second Edition Dungeons & Dragons, weapons did damage based upon creature size category. So small, medium, and large. So small and medium had one particular style damage, and large had another or type of damage that you did, the dice that you rolled. There is another alternative, which is that you... let's say your two-handed sword, if you want to make it different, you would roll 2d6, add 1 to each, and take the higher result. That would be another way to accomplish that. So there are a bunch of different ways to differentiate the way you're using weapons and the damage that they might do and those types of things. whether it would be that you give them an extra plus to hit, whether it would be that you give them an extra plus to damage, or both. There are a bunch of ways to differentiate these particular melee weapon stats that are in here so that they're not all just flat D6s. We never played where it was just a flat dice type for every single weapon. Certainly that's much, much simpler, but we like to have that differentiation in there. And back in the day, other than you're maybe somebody playing racist class, or your class itself, the only other differentiation is if you chose a particular type of armor or weapon that you used. So you wanted those numbers to be a little different depending on what you were able to afford and chose. So that's why we would run it that particular way. But again, it's your game, so you run it however you want to. On page 28, also at the bottom, there's table 12 talking about hiring assistants, and it gives you the gold piece cost of those things. And then on page 29, it gives you missile weapons and how much they would do. So, for example, a arrow fired from a short bow is a d6 minus 1, and a longbow would be just a d6. And that would be just as an example. A light crossbow is a d6 minus 1, whereas a heavy is a d6 plus 1. So there's very little differentiation or variation on theme there and on damage there. You could easily, again, manipulate those as well. Also, rate of fire is something that is here in White Box FMAG. That's baked into the system. I really liked that about first edition Dungeons & Dragons, and that slowly went away over time, or changed, or was altered, or was attached to your class and how many attacks per round you got with your class. And it made various different changes up and down the scale throughout time up into today. I prefer the rate of fire to be based upon the weapon itself like this. So longbow, your rate of fire is 2. Short bow is 2. But heavy crossbow is 1 per 2, or 1/2. So you would get one shot, and then you would have to reload, and then you would get a shot. And then, of course, light crossbow is 1. You'd shoot, reload, the next round shoot. Sling the same way, spear the same way. Hand axe is almost a weapon the same way. It's all 1 attack per round. I really like that. But again, it's your game. You choose however it is you want to play that. I just like that rate of fire baked into that system there. Then we can move on to armor at the bottom of page 29, which is chainmail. The descending armor class is -4, or -4, I should say, is the effect on your armor class, and the ascending is +4. Leather is an effect on your armor class of -2 and an ascending armor class of +2. And then plate mail is a -6 with a +6, and then shield is a -1 with a +1, and it gives your weights there. And then it has a little note at the bottom that at your discretion, the magical armor might weigh half of its original weight, or maybe even nothing at all. So then we move on to a really cool section, quite a little bit longer of reading here for today. It is Chapter 5, Playing the Game. Once characters have been created, the referee will describe where the characters are and what they can see. The game might start in a rural peasant village, a vast and teeming city, spiked with towers and minarets, a castle, a tavern, or at the gates of an ancient tomb. From that point on, players describe what their characters do, going downstairs, attacking a dragon, talking to other player characters or non-player characters controlled by the referee. All these kinds of actions are decided by the players. I like right in the midst of that, going down the stairs and talking to people, they have attacking a dragon. It's funny. Anyway, the referee then describes what happens as a result. The stairs lead down to a huge tomb. The dragon attacks the characters, imagine that, etc. The rules below are guidelines handling events like combat, gaining experience, movement, healing, dying, and other important parts of the game. Basically, the player and the referee work together, with the referee handling the details of a dangerous fantasy world and the player handling what their character does in it. The epic story of a character's rise to greatness, or death in the effort, is the players to create in the referee's world. Gaining experience, page 31. Characters are awarded experience points XP for killing monsters and accumulating treasure. When enough XP is earned, the character raises a level. Monsters have set experience point values in their descriptions, and 1 gold piece acquired is equal to 1 XP. Experience is awarded for accumulating treasure because every gold piece gained by a character is an index of his player's skill, and I would argue development in that skill over time. Awarding experience only for killing monsters fails to reward a party of adventurers that successfully lures a dragon away from its hoard so that a treasure can be stolen without a fight. And it fails to reward characters that operate by intelligence, stealth, trickery, and misdirection. And I very much agree with that. Without the XP for treasure, I just don't know where you could factor that back in without just giving generic roleplay awards, and that could be very, very wishy-washy as to how that might go. Each character has a prime attribute listed in this description, and the character creation process details how to determine the character's total XP bonus. There are two different ways of doing it, but each one results in a percent bonus. If a character's bonus is 10%, for example, and the referee awards 1,000 XP to each character, that particular character would get 1,100. 10% of 1,000 is 100, so the character gets a bonus XP of 100. Time. The referee will be required to make general rulings on the passage of time during the course of a campaign, i.e. a few hours later, and should be governed by common sense. There are, however, two important time measurements that merit brief definitions: the turn and combat round. A turn, lasting 10 minutes, is used to track and measure actions, movement, and resources when the intrepid adventurers are in dangerous places. The shorter combat round, lasting 1 minute, represents the back and forth action of battle. All right, so if you're used to playing 5e, I don't play that at all anymore, but if you're used to doing that, a combat round is 6 seconds. If you're playing Pathfinder, it's 6 seconds. If you're playing Pathfinder 2nd Edition, it's 6 seconds. I don't remember what it was in 2nd Edition Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, but I know in 1st Edition Advanced Dungeons & Dragons it was 1 minute. It makes you think like that's a huge, long amount of time, but you have to understand that's parrying, moving, feinting, dodging, all those kinds of tactical maneuvering things, feinting slices or stabs, those kinds of things at your opponent while you're all moving around one another in that fight, and everybody around the table is doing those same kinds of things. So 1 minute is actually, in the midst of what I just described, is not very much time at all. Okay, but that's why they do that here in this particular system. Then we move on to movement, and they have a table on the right, table 15 and table 16, that talks about movement rates. But here, base movement rate for all races is calculated in tens of feet per turn, allowing for 2 moves in a turn. Okay? Careful movement is used for exploring, checking for traps, and hidden things. Running movement is used when you're trying to get somewhere fast or get away from something wicked. Normal movement is pretty much everything else. Combat movement is used when characters are engaged in battle and time has transitioned to rounds instead of turns. So take a look at that table, 2 tables on chapter 31. First of all, it has the weight carried on table 15, starting at 0 to 75 pounds. An elf and a human have a movement rate of 12, and a dwarf and a halfling have a 9. You go all the way down to 151 to 300 pounds carried, and all those have a 3. Then you have categorization in table 16 of movement rate adjustments, and you start out with careful, which is half of the movement rate, normal, which is the movement rate itself, running, which is double, and combat, which is 1/3. Okay? So if you were to translate that into grid squares, for example, the way to do that, as far as combat movement is concerned, is you take that number, so we'll take the elf and human at 0 to 75 pounds as 12. You'll multiply that times 10, which would be 120, and then you'll divide that by 3. So that is 40 feet in a round. If at 5-foot squares, you have 8 squares of movement that you can accomplish, just as an example, as a way to move that or measure that out into the 5-foot grid format if you're using that type of mapping system for yourself. All right, so outdoor movement. Base movement rate is in miles per day, but can be doubled during a forced march. For outdoor combat movement rates, take the base rate, divide by 3, and multiply by 10 yards. For example, a base movement rate of 9 normally allows 9 miles of travel per day, 18 miles forced, and 30 yards of movement per combat round. The referee should decrease the normal rate of movement for travel over difficult terrain like swamps or mountains. All right. Next on page 32 is dungeon doors. Dungeon doors are large, heavy, and even unlocked are hard to open. Humans and elves will open an unlocked door on a roll of 1 to 2 and 6, while dwarves and halflings have a base of 1 and 6. At the referee's options, characters will apply any strength bonus or penalty to this roll. It is assumed that most monsters can easily open doors, and that once opened, doors will shut on their own. Yeah, that was the thing back in the day. When you opened the door, if you didn't spike it open, it was going to close behind you. So there were not a whole lot of open doors. So if you got way down into the dungeon and needed to run back, you were going to have to take a second to stop and open one of those doors unless you spiked everyone closed. Thus the reason to have a big bag of iron spikes, or several people have some iron spikes and some hammers to be able to do that. Or if you were going to rest in a room, you could go in and slam the door and spike it shut and have some relative safety and peace in that room to be able to get some rest and heal up. So that was a thing back in the day. It's a thing here in White Box Medieval, Fantastic Medieval Adventure Game. Moving on to page 33, light. Torches and lanterns illuminate a 30-foot radius. Torches burn for 1 hour, which is 6 turns, because remember, each turn is 10 minutes. 10 times 6, 60, so that's 1 hour. While lanterns burn 1 pint of oil in 4 hours, 24 turns. Players using a light source cannot normally surprise monsters, but they can, of course, still be surprised. It is assumed that all monsters see in the dark unless they're charmed or otherwise in the service of players. Listening at doors. Humans have a 1 in 6 chance of hearing noise. Non-humans hear noise on a roll of 1 to 2 and 6. Note that success indicates the player heard something, but they may not know what caused the noise. Also, by the way, just to be kind of devious as a dungeon master, it's always good every once in a while either put a magic mouth on the door to carry on at them when they put their ear to it, or to put some sort of unseen adhesive to the door, which is always fun, or make it a mimic. just to let you know what cruelty you can play on your characters as hazards on those doors and stuff, if they're going to abuse that thing especially. Secret doors. Secret doors can be detected by any player who is actively searching for one with a roll of 1 to 2 on a d6. Elves, however, find secret doors on a roll of 1 through 4 on a d6 when searching, or may sense with a 1 to 2 on a d6 that something is amiss by merely passing by a secret door. It takes 1 turn for each 10-foot by 10-foot area that is searched. So it's going to take you 10 minutes to thoroughly search a 10-foot by 10-foot square area. I think that's significant. That's important. I think that's why you want to make sure you have plenty of lantern oil and plenty of torches, or both, to go into your exploration activities in the dungeon, or that old abandoned tower, or whatever it might be. Traps. Most traps and pits are triggered on a roll of 1 to 2 on a d6 when any player passes over the triggering mechanism. Note that dwarves can detect stonework traps similarly to how elves detect secret doors. They have a 1 in 4 on a d6 chance to detect such traps if actively searching, or 1 in 2 in 6 if merely passing by. Players fall into a pit trap, and they will take 1d6 damage per 10-foot fallen. And that's, of course, not counting if there are spikes in the pit, and you get to add more dice to that damage. So that's always fun. Note on finding secret doors and traps. Ideally, players will be descriptive enough during a search that they will automatically find a trap or a secret door. For example, if moving a wall sconce opens a secret door and the player says, quote, "I examined the sconces on the north wall for anything unusual," a referee might automatically allow them to figure out how the secret door opens. If, however, they merely state, "I searched the north wall for secret doors," the referee can require a die roll. Some features might be so well hidden as to always merit a die roll, or at least a roll with some sort of adjustment. And I would say the old game was very much like that. It was all about being incredibly descriptive. That's why I'm a little bit leery about having a whole lot of like proficiencies, as they were called back in the day, skills as they're called today, that kind of thing on the sheet, because I believe it takes away from your ability to creatively describe while you're playing in this particular way. I'd rather not have them on the sheet, and I'd like the players to invoke their own descriptive, creative thought process to figure out things, rather than always resorting to looking down at the sheet and picking up a dice. But that's just how I like to run it. And by the way, that's a challenge for a dungeon master to get their players to do that if they're not used to that, certainly with kids, as I know all too well. Now we're on page 34 concerning combat. When the party of adventurers comes into contact with enemies, the order of events in the combat round is as follows. 1. The referee determines if one side or the other is entitled to a free attack or move as a result of surprise. This is either a judgment or a die roll of some kind, depending on the circumstances. Normally, anyone is surprised if they roll a 1 or a 2 on a d6, and that harkens back to old school. 2. Determine initiative. If one roll is made for each side, use that. If not, roll for each individual in combat. Okay, now I want to stop there. There's a step there that is skipped that I think is important, and we'll talk about it here in just a second, okay? So, back to initiative. Party with initiative acts first, and it's missile fire, casting spells, movement, melee attacks, etc., and the results take effect. So there's not necessarily a particular order, although there is kind of an implied order in the way that just was listed, but I don't think that's the intention. I think that's just a list. But back in the day, there was an intentionality in what acted first and what did not. Then next, party that lost initiative acts, and then the results take effect. Then the round is complete. Roll initiative for the next round if the battle has not been resolved. So here's that optional section that I would say that was kind of left out there from old school, and I think it's important. It's called intent. Some referees prefer to have all parties make a statement of intent before they roll initiative in order to force players to decide what they're doing before they know who goes first. And I believe there's a reason for that, and the reason for that is quite simple. You have 1 minute of dodging back and forth and doing all kinds of crazy stuff that's going on in the hectic chaos that is an encounter and combat or whatever that might be. You're not going to have time to stop and discuss tactics with each one of your characters there, to then roll your dice, to then figure out who goes, to then talk about what you're then going to do. I like to do it the other way. That way, whatever you say you're going to do, you commit to doing that, and then you roll the dice and see when you get to do it. That's just my preferred style. That declaration of action, or in this case, the statement of intent, I think that's kind of significant, and it changes the game in how you play that style. But again, it's your game. It's up to you how you want to do that. Again, this is also difficult to teach new players to the game that didn't start except for with 5e and going forward, or maybe even 3rd or 3.5, but certainly 5e and forward from there. Pathfinder 1st edition, obviously, and then 2nd edition, clearly. That was left out, and I think that's lacking. But it's hard to teach this because it changes how you're going to think about what you're going to do, and kind of can make you feel a little bit like, well, what I felt, if I would have known that I was going later, I would have chosen something different. You choose what you're going to do it, and move on. And I think that makes for a big deal for the game. But the Dungeon Master has to be kept honest about this too. You also, while they're stating their intention, you have to have your intention noted down so that you're not changing it on the fly behind the screen. The players will pick up on that. I think that level of stuff can sometimes be okay, but most of the time, a lot of good players would consider that to be cheating. You're getting to do something that they can't do in that regard. I know you can do that as with DM fiat when you're running the game, but I like to keep it a little more honest than that. All right, so bottom of page 34, how initiative works. At the beginning of the combat round, each side rolls initiative on a d6, and the high roll wins. The winning side acts first, casting spells, moving and attacking. The other side takes damage and casualties, and then has its turn. Initiative results may result in a tie. When this happens, both sides are considered to be acting simultaneously. The referee may handle this situation in any way they choose, with one caveat. The damage inflicted by the combatants during any simultaneous initiative is inflicted even if one of the combatants dies during the round. It is possible for two combatants to kill each other in this situation. If you want to play things more simply, just re-roll initiative if there's a tie until one side or the other wins the initiative. I really like that simultaneous action, simultaneous damage thing. I think that's pretty cool. Excuse me. And then there's an alternative combat sequence that's optional on page 35. The sequence of battle is one of the most commonly house-ruled parts of the game. Here is one possibility, also based on the original game. Roll for surprise. Anyone not surprised gets a free round of combat in the normal order. If neither side or both sides are surprised, move on to the next step. Roll for initiative. One roll for each whole side, and follow the sequence described. First, any prepared spells are cast. It takes a full combat round to prepare a spell, but one can be prepared ahead of time. Spellcasters who won the initiative cast their spells first. They may then start preparing a spell for the next round if desired. Now there's a catch with that, right? Because if you get hit while you're then preparing to cast a spell for the next round, and you do successfully get hit, then that spell is going to be disrupted unless you play it differently. Then next after that, missile weapons are fired. If the bow was already in the character's hands and ready to go, this also happens in order of initiative. Okay. Then melee combat takes place in order of initiative. Finally, movement takes place in order of initiative. Now, Basic Fantasy does movement a little bit different, and I kind of like it a little bit more. You can move before combat, but you cannot move after combat unless you are making a fighting withdrawal. Otherwise, they can get a parting shot on you. In new games, they call that an attack of opportunity. I don't know which wording I necessarily like better, but you get the idea. I think once you're engaged with someone in a combat scenario like that, moving is a big deal, and your enemy is going to take advantage of that. So I don't allow you to move and then attack and then move again. That's a 5th edition thing. I don't like that. I prefer the other way, but it's your game. Okay, and then he says at the bottom of page 35, if it is important to find out which character in the party does go before one another, just compare their dexterity scores to see which is higher. And then the way I do it is if that doesn't work either, instead of rerolling initiative, then you just have a d20 roll off, and whoever wins adding their dex modifier to that d20 roll off is the one that goes first in that tie. Then we go to chapter 36. I'll read this and then we'll stop for today. The attack roll. To attack with a weapon, the player rolls a d20 and adds any bonuses to the result. These to hit bonuses may include a strength bonus for attacks with handheld weapons, a dex bonus for attacks with missile weapons, and any bonuses for magical weapons, of course. The player then subtracts any to hit penalties they may have from their roll. Now you can subtract the to hit penalty from your roll, or you could subtract it, or you could add it to the opponents or subtract it from the opponents, depending on whether you're using ascending or descending armor class, their armor class rating. Either way you wanted to do that. The attack roll is then compared to a table to see if the attack hits. If the attack roll is equal to or higher than the number on the table, the attack hits. If you're using the ascending AC system, rather than refer to these tables, there's a quick method presented below that you can use. The referee decides which will be used. If an attack hits, it inflicts damage as determined by the weapon's damage die. The damage is subtracted from the defender's hit point total. See damage and death. Ascending AC combat quick method. If you're using the ascending AC system, it may be easier to calculate your to-hit rolls according to a simple formula. The numbers are the same as the descending AC tables. This is just a different way of calculating the results, and here's how it's done. To attack with a weapon, the player rolls a d20 and adds any bonuses to the result. These to-hit bonuses now include the character's base to-hit bonus as shown on the character class table, and may include a strength bonus for attacks with handheld, a dex bonus for attacks with missile, and any bonuses for magical weapons. The player then subtracts any penalties that they might have from their roll. If the result is equal to or greater than the opponent's ascending armor class, the attack hits. Note, this quick system only works for the ascending AC system. In order to use this system, you'll need to write down your base to hit bonus, adjust it as you gain levels, but after doing that, you won't have to check the table to see if you score a hit. All you need to know is whether the total result was equal to or higher than the target's armor class. And finally, damage and death. When a character or creature is hit, the amount of damage taken is deducted from his or her hit points. When hit points reach 0, the characters die. All right. I am going to read this on the bottom of page 37 because it refers to that damage and death. It's an optional, it's called less harsh method. Referees has different ideas concerning how lethal a game should be. For this reason, many allow characters to become unconscious at 0, with death staved off until the character reaches some predetermined negative number. And then on page 37, you have tables 17, 18, and 19, which is the cleric and thief attack tables by level, with descending armor class on top, ascending in brackets below. Then you have table 18, the fighter attack rolls, again by level, descending on top, ascending in brackets below, and then finally the magic user attack rolls of table 19, again by level, descending top, and ascending in brackets below. Okay, so when we talk about that less harsh method, I'm going to go on for just another few seconds. So for example, many referees employ a house rule which allows a character's hit points to fall below 0 by as many points as their level before the character dies. A 4th level character might die only if he falls below -4 hit points. Generally though, a character with fewer than 0 is considered to be bleeding to death at 1 hit point per round until the wounds are bound up. And I've heard some people say that really wasn't a thing in 1st edition AD&D. You might want to check your 1st edition Dungeon Master's Guide under 0 hit points in that section in the 1st edition DMG, because right there Gary lays out that there is such a thing that you can do an aid to binding as an action. It doesn't cost you any roll or anything, it just costs you your action for the round, and you arrest their loss of hit points. So if somebody ever tells you that was in the original game as well. Healing on the page 38. In addition to the various magical means of restoring hit points, a character will recover 1 full hit point per day of uninterrupted rest. 4 weeks of rest will restore all of a character's hit points, regardless of how many the character lost. And then, top of page 39, where we'll stop today for sure this time, is the optional binding wounds. Okay? Referees can allow characters to bind 1d6 hit points worth of wounds following a battle. This is of particular use in low magic campaigns or in adventures where none of the players have chosen to run a cleric. Note that the character can only recover hit points lost during that particular battle. Recovered hit points cannot cause a character to have more hit points than normal. Some referees view hit points as an abstract measurement of a character's stamina, with the attack that brings a character to 0 hit points representing an actual significant blow from a weapon. As such, they may allow characters to heal more hit points per day of rest. And I've heard that explanation as well. Again, run it however you want to in your game. Strive for as much realism or as little realism and just outright fantasy as you wish. As long as it's fun for you and your players, you all agree to it. Ultimately, the DM has the fiat decision in that regard. Again, thank you guys for listening and following along today. Again, go to Amazon, pick up this little book. It's about $5. It's well worth it. Get one for everybody at your table. While you're there, I would encourage you to pick up Basic Fantasy RPG, $5-6 for that one as well. Pick up one for each person at your table. You can go to Drive-Thru RPG and pick up PDFs of all of the stuff from James Spawn on the Swords and Wizardry, supplements to add to this that I have talked about before, and just kind of manipulate your game and house rule it however you want to. That's what we did back in the day. Very few people I ran into ever ran it exactly rules as written, or raw, as they say. As I say in all my videos, hey, it's your game, you play it and have fun with your table however you want to do that. And I will encourage you and hope that all of your rolls will be nat 20s. All right, take care.